Okay guys, I just wanted to do a little quick talk about why we, and hopefully you guys will take that into consideration, of why we perform the repetitions like we do. I know I've touched on it before, but I wanted to do a proper talk on it. And I'm not talking to people like they haven't got a clue here. It's just that, I want it to properly sink in. So with a repetition, you've got 3 levels of strength. You've got your positive, you've got your static, and you've got your negative. Now, believe it or not, your positive is your weakest level of strength. So when people are obsessed with the pushing part or the pulling part, super important, obviously, because that's mainly where your contraction usually comes from. But your static, you're stronger still, and your negative, that is the strongest level of strength, which is why sometimes you can pick up a bar and control it down very well, but then you can't move it beyond that point, or not for very many. So to get the absolute most out of each repetition, you want to try and work all those 3 levels of strength as much as possible throughout the set. So on a isolation exercise, so basically what you want to do is you want to be squeezing through the positive. You want to be holding the contraction for a count of 2, because most people rush the positive, use momentum, so they're missing a good portion of it. And then there's no peak contraction at all, whereas what you should be doing is holding and squeezing against the weight, contracting it hard, and then slowly lowering the weight down under control. Now, it shouldn't be so slow that it's a stop-start pace. It should be slow that you're controlling it, and the pace should pretty much remain the same from the top to the bottom. So a lot of the time towards the bottom of a movement, we kind of naturally relax and speed that up. So that is the point actually when you want to focus and really try and slow that down even more so the pace stays the same. So there is as much stress on that muscle as possible at all times. People will say it don't make a difference. It makes a phenomenal difference. You try a set like it and you'll know straight away from the feel of it how much difference it's making and how much tougher it is. When you're performing repetitions like that and sets like that and pushing yourself as far as you possibly can, you'll be exhausted at the end of that one set. If you're not, then you haven't pushed it hard enough. It's as simple as that, and you've not kept the focus right through. Yes, as I've said before, progressive overload is an important factor. If you were lifting in 12 months what you were lifting 12 months previously, you're not going to have progressed a great deal. But it's not the be all and end all. This writing in your book, fantastic, keep a record. I still do it now, I've got all my years, but I don't look, as I have done in the past, don't get me wrong, I got 10 repetitions last week, I have to get 11. The problem with that is that 99.9% of the time, you might get 11, but your form won't have been as good as it did for the 10. So if you'd have done that form the week before, you might have got 11 then as well. So it's not progressive overload. Okay, so we're not strongmen, we're not power lifters. We're trying to make a muscle move that way. We're trying to cause hypertrophy and cause muscular growth, okay? So with hypertrophy training, I should say, or anything like that, form has to be the key. Then build things up over time, which will naturally happen anyway. If you're covering the nutrition side, the recovery side properly, leaving enough time in between, it's going to happen. Sleep is massively important. I haven't focused on sleep probably as much as I should, but it's one of the biggest proponents of it all that you must do. So, but if you're covering all those factors, you will progress all the time. Might only be slight, but you will be progressing. The other point there of the progressive overload is if it took you a minute to perform a set, and then next week it takes you a minute and 5 seconds, you might only get the same amount of repetitions, but you're still stronger. Simply because it took you longer to perform the same amount of reps, so it was more controlled. So I just want you to think about that rather than just boom, 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 I need to be stronger than before. So going back to the reps, when you've performed the negative, try and take a good pause at the bottom for a second or so, again, just to eliminate that momentum. Now, some people will say that can be dangerous. You have to be very careful on certain movements, but as long as everything's under control, you're nice and tight from the last rep as it should be performed just like the first, you'll be okay. You can have an injury at any time, particularly if you're pushing yourself all out, which you need to be to get maximum growth. So even with perfect form, you will get injuries at times where people say, I've done a whole career, I've never had a, well, you ain't training hard enough then. Because obviously if you're pushing yourself to your limits, things can happen at any point. However, we want to eliminate that as much as possible, so focus on the quality. But that pause at the bottom just stops you bouncing out of things which, one, can cause an injury, two, you're missing a great portion of the movement, which is just not the point. Like I said, we want to get as much out of each repetition as we possibly can, so then the set is as perfect as possible. Now, going on to a compound exercise, on a lot of compound exercises, there is no peak contraction movement. On things like back and things there can be, but as an example on chest, there's no vast peak contraction at the top of a chest exercise, which is why a lot of people stop short to keep tension on. I don't do that, I go to a full lockout at the top. The simple fact is I want the greatest range of motion as I possibly can. And to be honest with you, performing repetitions properly, if you're stopping here and going back down, you'll just burn out so quickly. And yeah, you'll get a nice pump and feel, but going through that full range of motion, you're going to get a hell of a lot more by the time you get to the end of the set when you can push yourself to your absolute maximum. So the only difference is there is you're doing everything the same, the negative under control, you're pausing at the bottom. You're just not going to get a massive contraction point necessarily at the top, but we try to get you in positions and things so you get the absolute most out of each repetition at the top as well. So squeeze right through the movement, hard as squeeze as you can till you get to that lockout position, and then a slight pause is fine, but then you want to be immediately back into the next rep. So I just wanted you to understand that a little bit more of how important that is. You know, most muscle breakdown is actually caused on the negative, so control that. You know, when people come up and then they're dropping back down, it's nonsense. You know, it's ridiculous. I mean, I used to deadlift with a hell of a lot of weight for me and still do the negatives like that, and people used to say, well, you can't do that. Well, yes you can, why can't you? You know, it's just coming up and dropping it down. What is the point? You're missing a massive portion of the movement, and like I say, we're not just here to move a weight from A to B, we're trying to make muscles move that weight from A to B. So I just wanted to really get that in your head. We are obviously going to keep doing these talks and explaining different things. The reason that I want you to train to failure is quite simply because you're never going to stimulate the muscle the same by not going to failure. The fibers that are involved and what's happening there inside the muscle with the fibers, as you can imagine, when you're going to a point you can't move that weight anymore, the things that are happening there is very different to going to a point and stopping 2 or 3 reps short, no matter how many sets you do, because you're never going into that. You're never forcing yourself to that point, which is really the trigger for the body, the brain, everywhere to just go, holy shit, you know, I can't allow him to do this to me again, so I have to change. You know, when you're stopping 2 or 3 reps short, yeah, it can still be a really good set, but if you're doing that a lot of the time, the body's just going to get used to it. It will just become accustomed to it. It needs to be pushed to a point that it thinks, I can't have this happen to me, you know, I need to change here, you know, so I can cope with this better next time. So that's the main reason that we go to muscular failure. And obviously then, the harder you train, the less you can do. You know, it's quite simple really. If you went out running, if you were sprinting as hard as you could, how long can you do that for? It's a very short window of time compared to if you're going out and running steady, so you can do more and more of it. And the easy point there for me is look at a sprinter, look at a long distance runner, who's more muscular. You know, it's basic common sense really. So very, very low volume, very high intensity. Yes, you can train too hard. Don't let anybody tell you you can't, because you can destroy your nervous system. I watched something the other day, and loads of people are saying now that your nervous system and central nervous system and things don't get touched with training. Well, they've never done a hard set in their life if they think that. I'm sorry, that's the most ridiculous statement I've ever heard. If that wasn't the case, then when you're lifting super heavy and things, you would be able to go on all day lifting the same weight for the same amount of repetitions, because a lot of the time it's the nervous system that kicks in, the fatigue, that you can't carry that on, not just the muscle fatigue. So, you know, push yourself as hard as you can, but think about the recovery is super important. If you're not recovering, you're not growing, okay? So focus on the quality of the reps. The volume needs to be very, very low, the intensity high, but pushing to a point that you can cope with. You know, you don't want to be exhausted for a week on end after a workout. You know, you're going to be tired and there's going to be fatigue for maybe a couple of days or so, but you know, you should be able to train again, you know, 2, 3, 4 days down the line. It don't want to be like 2 weeks down the line, okay? So I just wanted to really get that into people's minds, really focus on that. Again, any questions, comments, just send them through. We'll do our best to answer them. We'll do our best to do the videos that people are asking for. And I just want to thank everybody for subscribing. If you haven't already, if you will, and give us a like on there, and then you won't miss anything that's coming up in the future. Okay, so thanks very much, guys.